Now 2023 has been an extremely exciting year for us motorcycle enthusiasts. A lot of motorcycles that were in the pipeline to be launched have launched, and we were waiting to ride them and we rode them, and 2023 just became a whole lot more exciting thanks to this, the all-new Royal Enfield Himalayan 452. Now this bike, it has been in development for a little over 6 years, and we finally get our first look and first taste of this motorcycle. Welcome to the Evo India channel and welcome to our first ride review of the all-new Royal Enfield Himalayan 452. Now before we proceed, if you like this video, do consider giving us a thumbs up, share this video with like-minded enthusiasts, and make sure you smash that bell icon to stay notified for all things thrill of riding. Now let's start with the design of this new Royal Enfield Himalayan 452. Now while the brief for Royal Enfield was to make an evolution of the Himalayan 411, not an all-new bike, what they have done is essentially make an all-new bike in terms of the way it rides and handles and all of its chassis components and all of that. But the design, it looks like a clear inspiration and a step up from the previous Himalayan. Now when we had seen the leaked photos, there were a few elements that didn't really sit well, especially because of the angles of the photos. But in the flesh, this bike looks great. It looks big, it looks long, it looks substantial, it looks like a proper step up over the previous Himalayan. Now in terms of the front end, you have a similar sized 21-inch front wheel with a 90 by 90 section tire, and you have the same circular headlamp with a windscreen. Now that again is a key Himalayan trait, especially with this railing for your extra jars or whatever you want to carry in terms of luggage. So that key DNA stays the same, but what's changed is the elements of that. So the windscreen has a slightly new design. The headlight is an all-new modern LED headlight, the one that looks similar to the Super Meteor. But what Royal Enfield tells us is the development for that headlight started with this bike and it was then adapted for the Super Meteor. Now if you move behind, you have this tank. Now this tank is significantly larger in terms of its shape than the previous Himalayan. In terms of capacity also, it holds 2 more liters than before. Now if you look at the photos from the side, the tank doesn't look as flattering as it does in person. In person it looks really nice, and especially when you're sitting on the rider's seat and you're looking at the tank, it looks like that of a much bigger bike. And speaking of the view from the rider's seat, you also have this all-new instrument cluster. Now this is a TFT instrument cluster, the first of a kind for Royal Enfield. It's called the Tripper Dash. So it essentially, the main selling point of this instrument cluster is the fact that it has Google Maps baked into it. So you have a full map view, unlike your turn-by-turn navigation, but if you so choose to, you can also get turn-by-turn navigations on it. You have a bunch of different layouts, all of which will be on your screen right now. You have an analog layout and you have a fully digital layout. You have the map view, then you can choose to play your music and see that on your screen. Basically all the crucial information you need while you're out on the go, you have that here. Now behind that you have a wide handlebar with new switchgear. Now this is basically an inspiration and adaptation of the chicken head switchgear that you've seen starting from the Meteor 350, but it's a little more industrial and modern looking on this bike. Now what's also new is you have a mode button over here, because this bike does have riding modes. You have your hazard button behind. The levers feel nice and premium, and coming on this side you have the pass light and the high beam button, behind which you have a home button, because now this is a TFT screen, there's a lot of functionality to control. So all of that happens with this mode button, this home button, and most importantly this joystick. So like bigger bikes like the Multi-Star and all, this makes things very easy to control and you're not diving into a gazillion menus to get to where you want to. Now coming further behind, you have this new engine. It's a liquid cooled engine. I'll get into more detail about that a little later on in this video, but in terms of a design point of view, it looks modern but with that same retro charm that Royal Enfield is known for. Now coming back to the saddle, this is a nice wide seat. It doesn't have the insane scoop like the 411 did. It's a more flatter bench style seat, and it is taller as well. Now the stock seat height is 825 mm, and you also have the option to increase it. Now for those who are not really comfortable with the taller seat, Royal Enfield also offers a shorter 805 mm seat height option. And the important thing to know, if you're considering that, is you will never lose out on the ground clearance, because the seat itself is reprofiled. There's nothing to do with the suspension or the ground clearance, so that is great. Now moving to the rear, you also have this new silencer, which is a lot smaller than it used to be on the Himalayan 411. And despite being a bigger engine, how Royal Enfield has managed to achieve that is make the catcon bigger than usual. So apart from all the emission related trickery that's happening in the catalytic converter, it also does a lot of the silencing. That allows them to have a smaller and higher placed exhaust, so your water wading capacity is also higher. Now you have a nice and comfortable rear seat, and the main talking point for this bike, from the rear end at least, is the lack of a tail light. Now it's not that it doesn't have one, it's just that it's integrated into the indicators itself. So that's basically about the design of the Royal Enfield Himalayan 452. Now if you thought that the design was the only thing that's new on this Himalayan 452, you're grossly mistaken, because sitting right here at the heart of the bike is an all-new engine, and a modern engine, I must add. Now this series of engine, it's called the Sherpa series of engine, and it's only fitting considering we're in the Himalayas riding the all-new Himalayan, and considering what this bike was developed for. Now speaking about the engine, it's an ultra-modern engine. It's got DOHC, 4 valves, liquid cooling, and it also makes around 39.5 bhp and 40 Newton meters of torque. Now that is significantly more than the previous Himalayan 411. Now before I go into telling you about this engine and what it feels like, I think it deserves a sound test, because after all this is a Royal Enfield and it's a new liquid cooled engine, which is a first for the company. So does it sound like a Royal Enfield? Now obviously that doesn't sound like the typical duk 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 sound that we associate with Royal Enfields, but it is a liquid cooled engine. It sounds pretty throaty, and in my opinion it does sound quite nice. Now another reason for the sound sounding so nice is the fact that the intake valve is a lot higher and closer to the engine. So there's a nice whistle sort of sound that comes as soon as you get on the gas, and it's actually quite addictive when you're out riding. Now speaking of riding, let's talk about the way this bike performs. Now before I tell you about that, you need to take into fact that we are riding at an altitude. So there is expected to be around a 30% power loss, and despite that this bike feels much faster, much more peppy than the previous Himalayan 452. But if you think about it, you are making close to 40 bhp and 40 Newton meters of torque, and now that it is a liquid cooled engine, you would automatically assume that it's not going to be nearly as tractable. But then again, you're wrong there too, because now the ratios, the way they spread out on this gearbox, the first 3 gears, or rather the first 4 gears, are geared such that they have well amount of grunt under 3000 rpm. So especially if you're riding off-road, you can be under 3000 rpm and putter around. And the 5th and the 6th gear, yes, you heard that right, there's a 6th gear in here as well. The 5th and the 6th gear are geared a little taller, and you need to rev it out to get the performance. Now this engine, it has a really nice duality to it, where it can be a slow tractor-like chugging along engine just like the previous Himalayan, but at the same time it also does have the top end, rather the mid-range and the top end performance that you'd associate with a high compression engine. So you can go really fast on this. And like I said, despite the 30% power deficit, we managed to sit at speeds at 110, 120, sometimes even touching 130 on the not so long roads over here. So that should be testament to what this will perform like at sea level, and I'm really interested to see how that is. But that will happen only at a later date when we ride it in our city. Now that being said, like I said, there are 6 gears with a slip and assist clutch. The gearbox is smooth, it's tactile, and it's a really positive feeling gearbox, and it's really easy to use as well. The clutch action is fairly light, so it's not really exhausting. Now overall, this engine is a big step up from the previous Himalayan, and what I really like about it, it still has those characteristics that you associate the Himalayan with, especially when you think about riding off-road. You want the tractability, you want the ease of use. This has all of that, but then this adds a whole new dimension of performance to this package. Now with that new engine, there's also a new chassis that enables you to really put this bike through its paces, all while still feeling like a really easy bike to ride. Now even in terms of refinement, this engine is quite refined. There are barely any vibes to be felt, and the little vibes that do come across aren't really harsh. You can actually go as far as qualifying them as character, if you will. And Royal Enfield has done a few smart things. They are aware that a high compression engine is bound to have vibrations. That's just part and parcel of performance. The more the performance, the more the moving parts, the higher and faster the moving parts, and as a result, more vibrations. So they've done small smart things like these damped foot pegs. So When you're sitting on it with less weight, the rubber sort of insulates you from the vibrations, and that does work to a fair extent. And when you put more weight on it, it goes down. And when you're really riding off-road, vibrations don't matter. Even at the bar and the seat, there was barely any vibrations to complain about. So even on that front, that's a great engine. Now, apart from the engine, the design, the chassis is also all new, and it's quite the comprehensive upgrade. Now let's start with how the bike feels like to sit on. And the first thing you'll notice is that it is a taller bike. Now, like I said in the start, this has 2 seat height modes. I've set it on the higher 845mm mode, and despite that, you can see I'm flat footing it pretty comfortably. That's because the bike is narrow in all the right places. Before I go ahead, let me just quickly stand on it and show you what that is like. Now I stand, and as you can see, this part here is narrow and it allows you to grip the bike perfectly. This is exactly the kind of stance I want when I'm standing and riding, and this allows me to do that. The only one thing I might change is maybe have a handlebar riser, so I'm not reaching over so much, so I can be a little more here with the handlebar somewhere here, and Royal Enfield will offer that as an accessory, of course. So now coming back to the chassis. Now starting with the frame, you have a new twin spine perimeter frame, and the engine is a stressed member of their entire setup. Now because of that, the engineers at Royal Enfield have managed to make the chassis setup a lot more taut, a lot more sharper, and a lot more agile. Now that is also down to the suspension, because the telescopic setup at the front has been swapped out for a Showa-sourced upside down fork setup. The rear is still a monoshock, but the mounting is a lot different, and the whole package comes together and makes such a nice handling motorcycle. Now when I say nice handling motorcycle, I'm not just talking about the ease of riding a Himalayan. The previous Himalayan was known to be notoriously easy to ride. Anyone with any amount of skill could get on it and have fun, and this retains a lot of that while also becoming a much sharper bike. For example, when you're in the corners, the previous Himalayan, you had to really muscle it around corners. Not that it wouldn't corner, but there was a fair bit of effort involved. This, a touch of counter steer and is leaned all the way into the corner with a lot of confidence. The suspension is otherworldly. I'm really shocked at the kind of suspension this has, because the way it damps things, the way it just isolates you from the road, in the sense that it keeps you comforted, it keeps you cushioned, and it lets the wheels and the suspension deal with everything, is just something you expect from a bike of many tiers higher than this. Even the rear monoshock is set up so well that you really don't feel the need for adjustability. Even with my weight, I didn't once feel that I needed to bump up the preload because the bike was a little too soft in the corners or any of that. Now you would assume that because it is such a good setup on the road that you'd compromise a bit on the off-road ability of the bike, but that's as far from the truth as it can be, because this, in the sort of terrain we rode in, which is sort of hard-packed sand, loose sand, stones, ruts and all of that, it just dealt with everything with so much ease that many times I didn't even feel like standing, because you'd usually end up standing for a little more control and also to isolate yourself from all the jolts that you get on the bike. But the suspension is just so good that it does most of that for you, so you can actually sit peacefully and even ride off-road. And I'm talking about carrying some serious space as well, so that is possible, but at the same time it retains that ease of riding, the friendly nature of the Himalayan. Now in terms of weight, this weighs in at around 196 kilos, so if on paper that's around 3 kilos less than the previous Himalayan, if you really think about it, it's around 5 kilos less, because this is also carrying 2 extra liters of fuel. Now does it feel heavy? If you're standstill, if you're moving it around the parking lot, or you're trying to take a U-turn, yes, its heft is felt, but trust me, just drop a gear, get past 10 kilometers per hour, and the way it hides its weight is unreal. So like I said, in terms of its handling, it's sharp to a point where it's a little scary. Now I'm not saying scary in terms of the way you feel, but 21-inch wheels aren't associated with being the best handlers. There is always a threshold that you lean it over a little too much and it's going to wash out. But here you're carrying so much lean so fast that you never really know when you're going to reach that threshold. But the chassis setup is just so nice and taut that it keeps you from that limit, but at the same time you're having a whole lot of fun. Now next up is the braking. You also have bigger brakes on this Himalayan. You have a bigger 270mm disc at the rear and a 300mm disc at the front. You have dual channel ABS, which is switchable, but now it's a lot easier to switch thanks to the TFT display and this joystick. So there's no pressing that hard button and basically making your finger go numb. Just 1-2 clicks over here and you're sorted. Now the brakes, they work well. They aren't the sharpest, but a bike of this sort where it's expected to spend a lot of its time off-road, you don't particularly want sharp brakes. This has just the right amount of bite, just the right amount of feedback, and especially when you're riding off-road, it's not scary to grab a handful of the front brake. Not that you should be doing that, but it's not scary. So on the whole, this chassis setup is really impressive, and my major takeaway is just how good that suspension is. And I can't wait to see what other bikes will come with this suspension. Now, apart from the chassis setup being very familiar and very easy to ride, this has also become a lot more capable as well. The ground clearance is up to 230 mm, and you also get 200 mm of travel at either ends. So bottoming out this bike is going to be quite hard, and believe me, I tried. Now this bike is packed with features, but the sort that you'd actually use. Now I didn't mention this during the engine, but this also gets a ride-by-wire system, and it's very well calibrated. It's not at all sharp, it's not jerky. It's a very seamless transition from on to off, one that you can modulate very well, and that's very important because, like I said, you're going to be spending a lot of time off-road on this. The enthusiasts buy this for that very reason. And you want something that you can control with a lot of finesse, and this you can do. Apart from that, you also get 2 riding modes. You get an eco riding mode and a performance riding mode, and that gets split into further 2 because the ABS is switchable in each mode. Eco essentially softens the throttle input further and also puts a cap on the performance, so you're not getting all the performance all the time. Now that will work when you're either not too confident on the off-road sections, B, you want to increase your fuel economy, or C, just want to set into a comfortable cruise. Apart from that, like I said, you also have switchable ABS, and the main feature that I'd like to talk about is that instrument cluster. Now navigation is something these bikes need to do because they're mostly long haul bikes going into unknown territory, and you'd like to know where you're going. The option up until now was having your intercom system, putting on maps on your phone and mounting it over there. But we all know that's not very good for you as a rider because that can be distracting. And number 2, it's not very good for the camera components of your phone either. Now, Royal Enfield's solution to this is actually quite a smart one. The Tripper navigation was already based on Google Maps, so that partnership has been standing for a while. Tripper navigation has been fairly accurate as far as our testing goes. Now what Royal Enfield has done is make use of that 4-inch colour-TFT screen and allow you to see a proper full-size map on the screen. So you're not just getting turn-by-turn indications, you're actually getting a proper map view like you would on your phone or on your Android Auto or Apple CarPlay enabled car screens. And the best part is that the way Royal Enfield has done this whole thing up is with simplicity at center stage. So there's no complications on the screen, there's no extra amount of information, there's no too many numbers, too many parameters, there's just what you need. So if you go into the full map view, all you get apart from that is your speed and your gear position indicator and some small things here and there. You can also toggle through your music settings because it does pair wirelessly to your Sena. Now the overall experience doing that was pretty good, but one downside is the fact that you're essentially mirroring your phone screen to that, and your phone needs to be on the whole time. And by on, I mean the screen needs to be on. So a 100-kilometer ride and your phone's battery is pretty much given up. The solution to that is using turn-by-turn navigation, which is essentially a small Tripper pod over there. This is called the Tripper Dash, and you get the Tripper pod, so you still get accurate turn-by-turn navigation. But overall, a very comprehensive feature set, and more importantly, a very usable feature set. A couple of things I would have liked, and this is something that Royal Enfield can implement in the future surely because they have the ride-by-wire system, is cruise control. Again, when you're on highways, sometimes it gets boring, and constantly holding the throttle can also introduce fatigue. So cruise control is something I liked, and again, because there's ride-by-wire, a quick shifter is also something that would be appreciated. Now these aren't complaints, these are just suggestions, and it would be nice to have these features, and Royal Enfield can always choose to give them as optional extras at a later date. So would you want that? Do let me know in the comment section down below. Now this new Royal Enfield Himalayan 452, it's not a big deal just for the automotive industry. It's a really big deal for Royal Enfield themselves because this marks their entry into the era of proper modern motorcycling. I mean, just take one look at it. You have a liquid-cooled engine, you have upside-down forks, you have a colour-TFT instrument cluster, you have ride mode, you have switchable ABS, LED lighting at all ends. I mean, what more can you ask for? This is at par, if not better, than all the modern motorcycles that you have, surely in terms of kit. And when it comes to the Himalayan itself, Royal Enfield have a thorough winner on their hands because while this is so modern, so new and such a departure from the previous Himalayan, it still holds on to that core Royal Enfield values with pride. And this takes all the things that we loved the previous Himalayan for and makes it that much better. And whereas all the flaws of the previous Himalayan were concerned, Royal Enfield has taken a sledgehammer to it and just destroyed all of them and made this that much better a motorcycle. It's a significantly better handler, it has more power, it's a better tourer, it's got proper electronics, things that you would actually use. And just overall, it is such a capable machine. And even for those people who are not really going to be going off-road as much, this is still a better commuter as well. Now it all boils down to the pricing. We are anticipating that this will be priced around 2.5 to 3.2 lakhs. That's the broad estimation that I'm giving you based on the 3 variants that are there. Now the variants aren't really spec differences, they're color differences, but be that as it may, if they manage to price it between 2.5 to 3.2, and that's a pretty well-educated guess that they might, considering how competitive they are with their pricing, the competition should really be worried. And whether or not you should be getting one, I think I've said more than enough to convince you to get one of these. So go out there, take a test ride, and fall in love with this all-new Himalayan 452.